مرة لم تبق من ذنوبه ذرة.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله، صلى الله عليك وعلى جدك وأبيك، صلى الله عليك وعلى أمك وأخيك، صلى الله عليك وعلى 9 المعصومين من بنيك، صلى الله عليك وعلى المستشهدين بين يديك. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن، إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين. بتعجيل فرج صاحب الزمان عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف، رحم الله من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. Today I really need your attention because we're going to discuss a very important topic, which is living in the West as a Muslim. And I would like to talk about 3 main points that we're going to discover or try to uncover today. First, assimilation versus separation versus accommodation. And I'm going to come back to every word I just said. Secondly, social versus ideological interaction. And thirdly, identity. And I want to start with identity first. And then I'll end with identity. Ladies, if I can ask you to please, quiet it a bit so that, inshallah, the youth and the English speakers and the audience can benefit, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you very much for listening. Alright, so if we look at identity, and we look at every individual. So, any individual in any society in the world, being Muslim or non-Muslim alike. If we look at a person who's born at their birth, you see that they belong to some sort of racial background, they belong to some sort of familial background. So for example, a person will be born from Smith family. Now they are from Smith family. Let's say they have Irish roots, so then racially they're Irish. Now already, at the point of birth, they already have 2 identities. They are from the Smith family and they are Irish. Now it happens that it's a boy, then a 3rd identity, a male. It happens that they grow up in a Catholic household, a 4th identity, Catholic, and so on. Our identities get picked up as we grow older and older, and as we adhere to new things in our lives. So then this person goes into college, at the university, they graduate from law with a law degree, they become a lawyer, 5th identity. They like, the Communist Party, they become a member of the Communist Party, 6th identity. They grow up into older, they go to the Communist Party, self-identity. Now I really like some theories from East Asia, and now I'm Confucius in my thinking, ape identity, and so on and so on and so on. No human being, even if they became atheists, even if they want to say, I have no identity and I can determine my own identity, sorry, it doesn't, you can, of course, determine your own identity. But we always have multiple of identities happening to us at the same time. Every one of us possesses a few identities at the same time. Racial, your family background, your religion, the ideologies you adhere to, your profession, where it's called you're culturally from, the city you are actually living in. Every single identity comes and gets added to the identities that we have. Every one of us has a core of identities. Therefore, and this is the point I need to say, being a Muslim is never, I am a Muslim or British, I'm a Muslim or Australian, I'm a Muslim or moderate, I'm a Muslim or progressive. It's never the case. It's not or. It's always and. This contradiction between identities that a lot of people try to embed in our heads, we should actually reject it. Yes, I can be a practicing Muslim. At the same time, I can be Australian, or in your cases, British. I can be from an Arab heritage, but at the same time, I'm very much an Australian citizen, and a British citizen. I'm a practicing Muslim, I'm a Muslim, and I'm Shia at the same time. It's because I'm Shia and suddenly I don't have any common ground with others, for example, from other religions who actually share some of the principles with us, but it's based on responsibility. This is an overall statement. Of course, we're going to come into details in the second one. So identity, there's never, we can never have one single dominant identity. Now, research shows that if people have multiple identities, and a religious identity and another adopted identity, if they adapt to only their religious identity and drop their other identities, their suicide rate goes up. The risk of suicide goes up. Teenagers. If they adhere to their religious identity only and drop, or if they go to their other identities and drop their religious identity, also their suicide risk goes up. What does that show us? We as humans are actually always prone to have different identities in our lives. It actually gives us relief. It gives us the power to live in this world. To have one identity and I'm going to block everything else, it's not practical, it's not realistic, and it's not going to happen. If it happens, then the consequences are severe. Why? Because at the end of the day, I live in a society. And Islam encourages us to live in society. Islam never said that you should be blocking every single doorway and you're just saying, I'm Muslim. Actually, Islam is against isolation. Absolutely against isolation. We have hadiths from the Imam sallallahu alayhi that clearly they say if someone isolates themselves from society, Imam alayhi salam says the person who is working and interacting with the society and a good mu'min is better than that person who's isolating himself and just worshiping. Even we have a hadith from Imam Sadiq, we are not like Christians. Islam, Islam. We don't have this, you seclude yourself for worship and I don't interact with society because I have my own ethical standards. We don't have that as a concept in Shiaism, and we don't have it as a concept in Ahlul Bayt Salam's literature. Actually, if we look at Imam's Imam's instructions, I mentioned a hadith a few nights ago, and I like to read it. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, if there is 100,000 inhabitants in a town, Cardiff, for example, and someone asks who is the best citizen in that town, because the follower of Ja'far should be appointed as number one. The follower of Ja'far, meaning himself, my follower, the Shia of Imam Ali alayhi salam, should be the first to be appointed. And Imam then says at the end, "Wala athar," and he's not exceeding expectations. He's not doing anyone favor. This is the basic expectation of the Imam of his followers. Now, very interestingly, if you did not interact with the public, and if you did not live amongst them, and if you did not have their identity as part of your identity, how on earth would have they known that you're the best person? You see the point? Imam alayhi salam used to encourage his companions to go and do trade, to be merchants, to be businessmen, to be doctors, to be engineers, to be scientists, to be. You know, Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Jibril, were actually the first to say there's a chemical, you know, the chemical element staple. He was the first to bring up the idea. Before that, it used to be different ideas. I can explain in a private session one day, inshallah, what Jibril's contribution to chemistry is. He was a student from Al-Ansari. Imam didn't tell him, no, don't study chemistry, just stick to religion. He didn't do that. So if we look at ourselves as Muslims living in the West, the second point comes, are we supposed to, which path should we take? Assimilation? Separation? Or accommodation? Assimilation in sociology means you migrate to a new community, to a new culture, and you make yourself similar to that culture. So for example, you migrate from Iraq, from Iran, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from wherever you are, to the UK, and as soon as you arrive, you actually start adopting their moral codes, their values, their way of life, their language, and so on. To the extent that you become the closest possible to how that society lives its everyday life. So you change your name, you change your language, you change your norms, you change your cultural ethics, and sometimes even it can go beyond that, and it can be actually even your moral codes and values. Not necessarily, but you basically make yourself as similar, that's why it's called assimilation, as similar as possible to your new environment where you have adopted as your motherland. That's assimilation. The second version is separation. You migrate to a new community, but you keep yourself completely separate from your new adopted homeland. So you go to the school, you go to uni, you know, when you're sick, you go to see the doctor. You're still living within the society, but you're completely separate. Completely separate. You protect yourself from their values, you protect yourself from their thoughts, you protect yourself, you don't build the friendships, you don't necessarily learn the language except what you need to. So that is actually one separation, when you build a bubble and you start living within that bubble. Now, does Islam, before I go to accommodation, does Islam accept the first version, or does Islam accept the second version? Assimilation. We have a concept in Islam, it's called Al-Ta'arrub ba'da al-Hijra. Al-Ta'arrub, it doesn't mean that you become an Arab. Ta'arrub basically means that you become ignorant. Basically, ta'arrub means you become of the Arab, like the Arab. Arab were the people who were living in the middle of the desert, who were actually ignorant of Islam and ignorant of the modern, or at that time, thought processes that exist in society. So that's a very basically came from that concept. Islam is not discriminatory. It's not trying to say you become like a Bedouin. It's actually just a verb in Arabic that was adopted from that concept. So التعرب بعد الهجرة means to turn ignorant after you migrate. So for example, you were living in a Muslim land, let's say you were living in Iraq, Saudi, wherever you were. You came to the UK, and then you forgot about your religion, you forgot about your values, you started adapting the local customs and traditions and so on, to the extent that you don't identify completely as a Muslim. Yes, you might identify as a Muslim, but your life, your practice, your lifestyle absolutely has nothing to do with Islam. Or your thoughts and your values become non-Islamic. That is a concept called turning ignorant after migration. التعرب بعد الهجرة. That is one of the biggest sins in Islam. One of the biggest sins in Islam is التعرب بعد الهجرة. Actually, it becomes wajib, so it becomes compulsory upon you to migrate back to another land, not completely back to the place you came from, but to wherever other land where you can protect yourself or your family, because we emphasize this today. You have to protect yourself and your families from going that path. So assimilation then, is it rejected in Islam? Not rejected. It's not just rejected. Islam actually prohibits it. And it becomes wajib upon you to even migrate if you have the risk of doing that. So assimilation is separation. It's separation and option points. We just talked about identities. Every one of us can have multiple identities. I can be a practicing Muslim, but I can be part of my medical profession. I can be a practicing Muslim, and I'm still going to my cricket club. I'm really into Manchester United, and I'm part of their fan group, and I'm still a practicing Muslim. I don't need to separate myself. We don't have a concept in Islam called separate yourself. We just talked about Ahlul Bayt, they want us to isolate. Actually, they want us to live. The Prophet ﷺ in Mecca lived with people like exactly how they lived. He traded with them, he lived with them, he interacted with them. He never went and isolated himself at all. Neither Imam Ali nor any of our Imams. They interacted with society. So separation is not our option. Then we come to accommodation. Accommodation is, I keep my own identity, I keep my moral codes, I keep my value system, and I adapt to the social norms that are in that place, where I become part of the culture and I actually influence the culture. It becomes bi-directional relationship. I don't just melt into the culture. I actually keep my own identity, my religious identity, my values identity, my ethical, my moral identity, and I make friends. I live a very normal life. I buy a house like everybody else. I buy furniture like everybody else. I join social, groups. I interact with society. I'm part of society, but I expect also to be respected, and I influence the same. And that is basically, different terms can be used: diversity, multiculturalism, whatever terminology you want to use. But also, is accommodation a community-wide or it's individual? I say there are two types of accommodation. There is a community-wide accommodation, but there is individual. Every one of us is different. No one-size shoes fits everybody. How much do I interact with society depending on my personal situation and how do I see and assess the risk on my family. Give you a practical example. I see that my kids are growing up in a way where they understand the religion, they know the principles, they are very well protected. I have tested them, I have seen how good they are in knowing their religion, knowing their boundaries. They're really good. I let them go into society, let them interact with society, most likely they're going to influence society in a good way. If I see that my situation, my kids are not there, they are still starting to learn our moral codes, they are not sure, I am still not confident that they actually know how to interact with the wider society, then I make sure I concentrate on that before I let them wide into the society. I'm not saying be restricted with your kids. I'm saying prepare your kids. We talked about it, and that's why I'm coming into steps right away. First lecture, 2 days ago, I talked about prevention and early intervention. Yesterday, I then built on that, and today, practical parenting, and today I want to go into now as a society, interacting with society. It's very important that accommodation to different degrees depending on your situation. It shouldn't be a community-wide, it should be individual, based on you and your situation. The best judge is yourself. In order for me, if I know my kids, at the end of the day, see, I'm gonna go back to Australia a bit and then come back. I'll bring 2 examples. One, we have Ashura procession in Sydney. Alhamdulillah, we started 20 years ago. Actually, this year is the 20th anniversary for it. And mashallah, it's spread all over Australia. One day, 3 years ago, one journalist, who's actually a historian, she saw the procession in the middle of Sydney. She didn't even contact us. Suddenly we see in Sydney Morning Herald, an article was published by her where she says, and she has put the actual Sydney Gazette of 1806 reporting Arba'in procession in Sydney in 1806. Australia was recognized, or was the first British ship that arrived in Australia was 1788. In 1806, there was already Shia in Australia doing commemorating Arba'in. And Sydney Gazette of 1806 talks about it. 1806. That's 18 years after Australia was discovered. It's amazing. Like, it's for us, it was amazing historically, and we started using as evidence that Shia actually have been here since day one. Because if in 1806 the celebration should have been that big, that Sydney Gazette had to write about it, then that means it's been a few years in the making that it became such a big incident that the journalists of the time would write about, right? Do we have any Shia remaining who actually were living in 1806? What happened to them? What happened to the Shia who lived in Australia in 1806? We don't know. They didn't migrate. Second example. When Australia first was discovered, Australia in the middle, we have a huge desert. You can't really migrate through, you can't, discover it easily, especially in the, back in the 18th century. So what they did, they went to Afghanistan and they brought the Afghans with their camels to explore the middle of Australia. So these were just people who knew how to ride camels, and the explorers would hire them and bring them into the middle of Australia and just go for the desert and discover the land. It was a continent. They built mosques everywhere they went. And they remain until today. Of course, mostly as ruins. And people are trying now to, revive them and so on. It was a thriving community. And in historical books, we have photos, we have historical records, we have actual records of how many came, where they worked, the explorers talk about them. None of their descendants are Muslim. None of their descendants are Muslim. None. Actually, none of their descendants have anything to do with the Afghan culture. I'm actually bringing you real life examples of how assimilation will actually take us and where it's going to take us. So it's very important for us to actually have these conversations. How can we establish an identity in this land where actually our future generations be part of society? No one says otherwise. Be British, be Australian, be American, be Irish, be Welsh, whatever other identity you want to adapt or you're born into, by all means. Islam, your Islamic identity should not ever be looked at as a burden on your other identity. Because at the end of the day, even if you choose to be anything else, you have multiple identities anyway. And that's what I started with. So what we have to be very careful of is assimilation. Now, accommodation, when it comes to that, obviously, every single family should look at their own situation. But at the same time, and I mentioned it yesterday and I repeat again, a child is raised by a community. So the individual father and mother can't by themselves create that cultural hub, that religious hub where the kids will feel that they have something to identify with. Now let me give you a positive example again from Australia. I remember 23 years ago, 24 years ago, especially after September 11, almost every young person started adapting in our own community in Australia, started adapting an Anglo name. Muhammad became Michael. Ali became Alex. I'm not sure if it happened in Britain as well, or in the United Kingdom. Everyone started, Sami became Sam. Everyone almost started changing them, changing them. And the reason people started changing their names because you wouldn't get a job. You simply wouldn't get a job. And there are actually studies about it. Your chances of landing a job interview with an Islamic name was 80% less than if you had an Anglo name. Just to land an interview, they still don't know if you're Muslim or not. They can possibly not even practice it. It got to an extent that people started appearing as trying to, not appear in any way associated with their Islamic identity. Yes, they would come to Husayniyya and they would decry for Imam Hussein and they would do Allah and they would help us and do exactly the same thing. But when they went home, they adopted Michael, they not Muhammad. And they definitely didn't dress in any way that would give and indicate they are Muslim. A lot of people were actually shaving their head. He was actively participating in society by being a teacher. Yet, ideologically, did he adhere to what Kufians were doing? No. I'm a man of my own. It's extremely important for us when you're interacting, multi-faith by all means. Have friends from all walks of life. Have friends from all religions. No one said otherwise. Islam doesn't want you to isolate yourself. Islam actually encourages you to take care of your neighbors. It doesn't say if your neighbor was Shia, if your neighbor was Muslim. It doesn't say that. Actually, the Prophet ﷺ used to take care of his neighbor who was a Jew and who used to throw rubbish in his path. You have to interact with society, but socially, not ideologically. Ideologically, you still have an identity, and that's your identity. Don't sell it short. Why would you? Because if you're adopting someone else's, they have pros and cons as well. Al-Ansari of Imam Hussein alayhi salam had that quality. They knew what is social and what is ideological. Also, they knew their identity. See, for example, a little boy, he goes to the Hamid of Amiri Husaynun wa ni'mal amir. He went into the battlefield saying, my prince is Hussein, and he's the best of friends. He knew his identity. My identity is I belong to Imam Hussein. And that's my identity. Alright, I'm an Arab, I'm with my tribe, I am this. Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, when he saw that Imam Hussein was the right path, he was shivering. One of his friends comes to him and says, Hurr, I have never seen you shiver like this. If they ask me, who is the bravest man of Kufa, I would mention you first. Why are you in this state? He goes, وَيْحَكَ إِنِّي أُخَيِّرُ نَفْسِي بَيْنَ الْجَنَّةَ وَالنَّارِ. Because what are you talking about? I'm giving myself a choice. Should I choose the hell or should I choose paradise? Should I choose Hussein or should I choose Yazid? That's why our identity should be embedded within us, no matter what other identities we have at the same time. At the same time, going back to the second point, we have to be accommodating with society, not assimilating. And we have the third point, we have to differentiate between social and ideological. If we have these in mind, and they're all practical by the way, if we have those principles in mind, then it doesn't matter who our friends are anymore. It doesn't matter which society we migrate to. Because now we actually know who we are. And that's why Sheikh mentioned this yesterday, which was a very beautiful lecture. He said the narration from Prophet Ali alayhi salam, and I will end with this and pass on to the Sheikh. He says, Al-Jahilu bi-nafsih. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, a person who's ignorant about himself, he's ignorant of everything. All of this goes back to knowing myself. Knowing my identity, identifying who am I. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the strength to identify who we are and to always identify with Imam Hussein alayhi salam until our return of our Imam. And please join me to recite Allah's salawat.